where that came from. Maybe that was something assumed by planning staff. I'm not sure. But that is not something that's been on the table that certainly we have proposed. We would like an approval with those 2 amendments that we talked about so that this client can move on and generate some economic development for Norfolk County.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, just to the councillors, this is a little bit because we're all new, so some clarification from our clerk, which I think is a good point to make. We will not be able to speak to the motions until such time as the public meeting is closed in the future. So, again, our apologies. We'll carry on and ask if there's anybody here that would like to speak in favor of the application. If you could please state your name and address.
My name is Helen LaRochelle. We are recent additions to Norfolk County. We moved into 580 St. John's Road, which I believe most people know is the funny-looking house up on the hill, right adjacent to the Jagers property. I live there with my partner, Michael. We are very much in favor of the development that they are putting forward for the area. However, we are the ones who wrote the letter with some minor concerns that we are just hoping that in whatever the zoning bylaw amendments, whatever the right words are for that, can somehow address some of those concerns without hampering their development of the site. The major points for us are the very spot where our property is adjacent to theirs is right at the Lynn River, and that spot is exactly why we bought the property. It's beautiful, it's quiet, it's serene, and we don't want to lose that. We've had the pleasure of sitting down with the Jagers, and they seem very amenable to everything that we talked about. And what we were hoping is that there could be some sort of definition as to where the glampers would actually access the river, because the Jagers property extends much further down the river than ours does. So our hope is that something official in this would define that those glampers would be accessing the river further down instead of being right on top of the adjacent point of our properties. And we understand that the Jagers want to support that and reinforce that with anybody who's on their property. However, we also know that zoning is something that lasts well beyond whoever is currently the person asking for the amendment. So we just want to make sure that ongoing, that there won't be someone who won't be as willing to reinforce that kind of limitation, which would then severely hamper our enjoyment of our property. So if there is some way within this process to at least define where those glampers access through, I believe Alicia mentioned fencing, or even just, you know, something that we can push back on if there is abuse of the space, we would much appreciate it. And the other thing, which is very new around the outdoor space issue that has arisen today, we again have no objections to them using their barn. We have no objections to the bridal showers spilling outside of the barn. But just, we would voice a concern because we are at the top of the hill. We do hear everything that comes through the valley, and you know, some live music on one weekend during the summer is actually kind of great. But just, we want to make sure that whatever does happen with these events extending outside the barn does not end up resulting in excessive amounts of people and excessive noise on a regular basis and incredibly frequently. So as long as that is something that's taken into account, because again, we are at the top of the hill. We even hear every car that goes down Blue Line Road, and it even comes through when all windows are closed. So it's just to be cognizant of that and how it could potentially affect. So as long as any of the wording around any of this protects us from abuses from potential people that will not be as respectful and friendly as the Jagers.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from councillors? Mr. Valley, maybe I might be able to call you back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just 2 comments. These larger events that are being referred to, Keep in mind, we're not asking for permission for those large events through this zoning amendment. Our client has had a few of these large events in the past, and those have been permitted through an application to Norfolk County for a special event permit, which has been approved. Part of our insistence on this, getting rid of this prohibition of outside events, is that if that bylaw is approved with prohibiting outdoor events, and then we come along this year to get the same special permit that we've got every year, that someone in the zoning department will say, well, your zoning says right here you can't have outside of permits, therefore your special permit that you've got every year for the last number of years is now denied. So we don't want to get into that scenario. So the large events that are being spoken to, those are addressed under a special event permit that is separate and nothing to do really with the application before you. As far as the setback and so on from the river, it's important to notice that that area all along the river is zoned hazard land, and therefore, in order to get any form of permit from Norfolk County, all of our work has to be outside of that permit, and that's controlled through your building department with or without site plan approval. So that is, that's basically how we are restricted now from having anything too close to the river because of the existing hazard land zoning.
Councillor Martin?
It's my understanding that there won't actually be any glamping sites directly on the river. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And additionally, have the Jaggers had a conversation with you about how they would deflect potential glampers from entering in the river at one specific spot versus another?
So to refer to that, there is actually a schematic site plan that was provided that does show the intended location of the glamping sites, and they're well outside the hazard line, which runs along the river. There's also, the Jagger family is very respectful of this river and the natural heritage that's along the river. It's certainly their idea to restrict people in whatever way they can. They don't obviously want to put up massive fencing or anything to do that, but perhaps appropriate signage and so on their site, and education through their visitors to make them aware that this is a natural area and that it needs to be treated with respect, as well as the neighbors, and that their land needs to be treated with respect. Quite frankly, we understand the comments that the neighbor has made. However, the reality of that is something almost impossible to enforce by law, whether it's a site plan or a zone or whatever. People walking on a site can be difficult to control where people walk unless you choose to put up the Alcatraz fence, and I don't think that is in concert with anything that these people want to do on their natural site. So I'll leave that at that. Any other questions?
Councillor Columbus?
Mayor, Mr. Valley, rather than have this application deferred to the new year, would you not agree to leave that statement in here that special events shall not have any outdoor component, rather than have it deferred?
That clause in there is a significant problem for my client, and if that stays in, then we're making another application, we're paying another fee, we're going through another several months to come back here to have an exemption on that. As I said, we are very concerned that clause will prevent us from getting the special event permits that we have been successfully obtaining from Norfolk County over the past number of years. So, no, the answer is no. We would not be in favor of approving the zoning with that clause in it.
Thank you.
Mr. Valley, perhaps you could just, since a number of the councillors are new, you could explain, and you've been around here a while, how the special event permits work and for how many people you need to apply for one and so on, so that they understand that this perhaps isn't a day-to-day activity that would take place.
So we are not in particular involved in that application, so I have a very limited knowledge, and your staff may actually be able to answer that question better than I can. But the client basically goes to the county, says, this is an event I want to have, these are the details, these are the number of people, and they get a special event permit which allows something on the site, some form of special event, which may not otherwise be permitted. So if there's going to be a music festival outside, it's good on these dates, these times, certain restrictions, and it's approved for that specific time, as opposed to a zoning bylaw amendment, which is good forever. And I'm sure Clerk Griselle could elaborate on that if you need more information there, but that's the limit of my knowledge of it.
Okay, Thank you, sir. Any further questions for Mr. Valley? Ms. Dusling, maybe I could call you back.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you could just speak to that same question, how a special event permit would be different than allowing the outdoor use?
Yes, through you, Mayor Chop, I can only provide so much information. It is a function under our corporate services area of the county, the special events permit. I do know from a planning perspective that planning is circulated on the special events, and we simply outline if the zoning complies with that special event or if it does not.
But typically, for a large-scale event, that would be a separate permit application. So even if we allowed the outdoor use or removed it from this proposed bylaw, for any large-scale events that took place outdoors, they would, in addition, still need to apply for a permit, even if that was removed.
Through you, Mayor Chop, yes, that's my understanding. I do know that no event permits have been required in the past on this property.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else here today that would like to speak in favor of the applicant? And is there anybody that would like to speak against the application or just generally? Okay, I would, anything further from council, first of all? And could I ask for a verbal motion to close the public meeting? Ms. Martin, Councillor Martin, my apologies, and seconded by Councillor Rabbits. All in favor? And carried. Would someone like to move the staff recommendation or propose an alternative? Councillor Rabbits?
I would like to move our staff recommendations with some amendments. I would like to have the minor site plan adopted, in addition to removing the language specifying that special events shall not have any outdoor component.
Any further amendments? My apologies, just unfamiliar with the procedure here. I would like to pass the, Councillor Columbus.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we did receive public input, so that last paragraph under the recommendation should not be included.
This is the main motion. That's the further
Okay, I see. Thank you, Councillor Columbus. Councillor Martin.
I don't know if it should be noted or not that the applicants have also requested for no additional studies if they are put under a minor site plan.
At this point, if it's okay, I would like to pass the chair to Councillor Martin and make an amendment to the motion myself. I would like to amend that section of the bylaw 71-7, or is it 2-2018, be amended through the deletion of the following sentence. The special events shall not have any outdoor component, and that staff be directed to not require the site plan component. Okay, I'd like to open up the floor for discussion. Okay, it's my, sorry.
Sorry, we'll need a seconder. Councillor Huffman.
I wouldn't mind speaking to it, so I'll
Mayor Chop?
I'll let you carry on if you don't mind. No, you can stay down there and just, does anybody want to speak to it? You can just see if anybody wants to speak to the motion.
Would anyone like to speak to the new motion on the floor? Councillor Rabbits.
I would just like to have the motion read one more time for clarification, please.
That Section 3 of Bylaw 71-2-2018 be amended through the deletion of the following sentence: "The special events shall not have any outdoor component," and that no site plan be required. Councillor Columbus.
Here, I'm confused. Are we not dealing with this recommendation, like the first paragraph here that's included? Maybe Mr. Griselle can answer that. Do I put the message through you? I guess-
Through you, Madam Deputy
Sorry.
Mayor.
No, it's okay.
I'm confused.
So
The
just to
message is
explain,
which chair,
we
really.
have the main motion, and now we have two amendments. So the first amendment is the one that was proposed by Councillor Taylor, which is the first section of that one, and then the second amendment is the removal of the site plan requirement altogether, which is Mayor Chop's change. So what we'll do is we'll go through and deal first with the removal of the site plan in totality, then we'll go and deal with the removal of the wording in the bylaw, and then we'll deal with the main motion as the final. So there's three separate votes that we'll hold.
Thank you.
My apologies for not switching the chair. My understanding was we had discussed this at orientation, and we had decided that we would just pass the baton, so to speak, and remain in our seats to facilitate discussion. So Amy carries on. from
So
there.
we're speaking to removal of site plan. Does anyone have it? Counselor?
Yes, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I know the property. Wandered through the creek myself in my younger days. There's some nice trout in there too. I know what the applicants are trying to do. I can't see the need for site plan control. I don't think any reasonable person would think that if they got approval to fix up the old barn and hold events there, that people might not wander in and out. So I don't think we'd be in violation of any unwritten law that says you have to recirculate that to tell people. I'd also like to know how many people actually live within 200 feet of that property. It might only be the one anyway. So I don't think we would have any problem supporting the mayor's amendment, so I would second your amendment.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Counselor. Would anyone else like to speak to the mayor's amendment? Mayor Chop.
I think it's important, it's something that I maintain throughout the campaign, that we have to start respecting the intention of the Ontario legislature. And again, so that all of the councillors are aware, site plan control is an approval, a mechanism that's been granted to municipalities through the Ontario Planning Act that allows them to designate all or part of an area within our municipality as falling under a site plan control zone. If it is determined that you fall within that area, you must also meet the definition of development in order for that section of the application to be applicable to you. And that section, Section 41 of the Ontario Planning Act, clearly states that site plan control applies to development, and development is defined as the construction, erection, or placing of one or more structures, additions or alterations that have the effect of substantially increasing the usability, and a provision for commercial parking lots, which, as I presented earlier, I do not believe that this meets the definition of a commercial parking lot or the intention of the legislature.
Thank you. So at this point in time, we would vote. Mr. Griselle? So we have the motion on the floor by Mayor Chop, seconded by Councillor Huffman, that the motion be further amended to remove all site plan control conditions. Those in favor? And those opposed? Carried.
The chair back, and it's only the top part there.
Okay, I'll take the chair back. We have a motion moved by Councillor Rabbits and seconded by Councillor Van Passen that Section 3 of the bylaw 71-2-2018 be amended through the deletion of the following sentence: "The special events shall not have any outdoor component." All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, and on the main motion, I will need a mover that the application by Jonathan Yeager at 524 St. John's Road East, affecting the lands as described, as part Lot 7 and 8, Concession 2, Geographic Township of Woodhouse, Norfolk County, to amend the Norfolk County Official Plan and the Norfolk County Zoning Bylaw, file number OPNPL201886, be approved for the reasons set out in the report. All in favor? Or I need a mover, my apologies. Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Rabbits. And all in favor? Carried. Any opposed? No. I think I saw a yes, thanks. Okay, we're at Tijuana now. No. Okay, now we need to deal with staff report DCS 18-107. This is Ms. Van Dalen that will be presenting. I would now like to call the meeting open to the public on DCS 18-107.
Good evening, Mayor Chop, members of council, staff, and public. This report is with respect this presentation is with respect to report DCS 18-107 for a zoning amendment. The subject lands are located at 72 Clubhouse Road in the resort residential node of Turkey Point, and this zoning application is to facilitate a boundary adjustment to correct an encroachment issue. The subject lands are located at the rear of the property, and the boundary adjustment application will be heard at the Committee of Adjustment hearing tomorrow evening. This zoning amendment would consolidate the zoning on the property and create a single zone and consistency on the lot. The application was circulated to the various departments and agencies as well as members of the public, and there were no concerns or objections received. And based on the foregoing, staff are recommending support of the application, and I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from councillors? Don't see any. Thank you. Is there anyone here in the audience that would like to speak in favor of this application? If you could please state your full name, sir, and address.
Absolutely. My name is Rob Van Porten, J.H. Cahoon Engineering Limited. I represent the applicant. As was described in the staff report, Madam Mayor and members of council, this is a rather unique situation. Our client owns a cottage lot backing onto the marina, and he wishes to reconstruct the boathouse and finds that the boathouse is partially on the marina property. And this is not unique, I understand, throughout the marina. We have applied for the consent to transfer this approximate 7-foot wide strip of land from the marina property to our client's property. We have applied for a variance because the reconstruction of the boathouse involves a height variation. Both of those items will be heard tomorrow night at the Committee of Adjustment. And obviously one of the conditions of the severance will be that the zoning of that 7-foot strip be amended so it's consistent with the cottage property as being resort residential. Madam Chair and members, this is the basis of the application. I'd be more than willing to respond to any questions.
Any questions from any of the councillors? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak in favor of the application? And anyone in general or against the application? Anything further from councillors? Okay, seeing none, would somebody please make a motion to close the public portion of the meeting? Councillor Michele and seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? Would someone like to move the staff recommendation or propose an alternative? Councillor Rabbits?
I would like to move the staff recommendation as printed on page 119 of our agenda.
And a seconder? Councillor Martin? All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, next we will be dealing with staff report DCS 18-108. Ms. Van Dalen, will you be presenting this report? Okay. I would now like to call open the public meeting on DCS 18-108.
All right, good evening again. This presentation is with respect to DCS 18-108 regarding the Clonmel Estates property in Port Dover. There is a bit of history with respect to this application. It was originally heard at the September 25th public meeting before Council. There was actually two applications that were heard at that time. This application, which is for a temporary use to permit a hotel and special event space, as well as the second application for 36 stacked townhouses on the subject lands. The application for the hotel was deferred, was recommended for approval, but deferred by Council at that time. The residential component was recommended for deferral and deferred by Council. There was a number of issues that were raised with respect to the hotel, with in particular to noise, parking, and just general function of the property. So the application was deferred and requested to be brought back to this meeting, and so here we are. Staff are again recommending approval of the application, and what that would see is a temporary zoning on the property to permit a 9-room hotel with associated event space. The amendment would also see the removal of a bar nightclub as a permitted use in cooking opportunities within the rental units. The hotel would be located within the existing Clonmel estate, and there would be no form or function change to the exterior of the building, so the heritage components would be maintained. As stated, there was a number of concerns. A lot of the concerns came through some of the special events that were happening on site, and with respect to the lack of parking. The neighbors were concerned with parking along Clonmel Lane, which is a slightly narrower road allowance than you'd find for some of our municipal roads. Noise levels associated with special events, general increased traffic in the area, lack of sidewalks to the area, and the preservation of the heritage features of the property. Based on the conversations and the concerns that were heard and raised through a number of letters as well as conversations and the points at the September 25th meeting, a draft site plan has been provided by the proponent. It would see for a 30-meter setback proposed so that no outdoor event space can be located within there. It also calls for the creation of 41 parking spaces on site as well. Through that, there would also be the erection of a board-on-board or privacy fence along the rear yards of the residential units along Clonmel, and also that a holding provision be put in place to ensure that the parking and the site plan is completed for the development. Planning staff feel that that the site plan and the works that have been completed by the proponent are helpful to address the concerns that have been raised. We see this property as a key feature for Port Dover and a unique opportunity in terms of accommodations that are needed within the area. Based on that, planning staff are recommending support of this application, and I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm just looking at our last week's agenda package here for the council and committee, and it was where we discussed the official plan. And there's a modification here, number 7, A, B, and C. It is important to conserve the county's cultural heritage resources, including buildings, structures, monuments, in areas of unique or rare settlement composition, streetscape, landscape, or in architectural resources of cultural heritage value of interest. It is the intent of the county to support these conservation efforts for the benefit of the community. Do you not feel that we are in contravention of this statement?
Through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of that statement, I do not believe so. There's going to be no change to the exterior of the building. The property is designated through the Ontario Heritage Act, so there are specific requirements that are identified through that. The property essentially functions as it stands right now. It is permitted to have a bed and breakfast as of right, which is permitted to have 3 rooms. As well, the property currently has a boarding and lodging availability, which can accommodate up to 10 individuals. So through the amendment, we would be looking at removing that on the temporary basis and allowing the hotel. So it essentially will change from the 3 bedrooms for the bed and breakfast and the boarding and lodging to recognize the hotel, which also has accessory, secondary, or excuse me, as of right accessory uses that go along with that. So as I stated, there will be no change to the front of the building for the hotel component. In terms of the residential, that is also being reviewed through a separate development application. That is a component that we're taking into consideration through that process, because they are proposing for townhouse blocks that are part of that. So I would see that as a better fit under there, because there is the change to, or potential to change the property in itself. But for this application, I would say that it does still meet the official plan.
Thank you, Shannon.
Councillor Rapids.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My follow-up question through the chair to our planning staff. I'm looking at DCS 18-99. I was also researching DCS 18-100. It's not included today. It's previous deferred information that's been brought forward to council. And in that report, we had some concerns at the time about access points that were proposed to be constructed through the stone wall, which carries a heritage designation. I was wondering, I've had a large volume of information to get through, if we've addressed that concern or where we're at in terms of preserving the stone wall.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Rabbits. For this application, for the hotel component, the access to the property will be via Clonmill Lane, where the existing driveway is to the parking lot. On the concept plan, here, I'm not sure if my mouse is working. Oh, there, sorry. So, sorry, it's very jumpy. Right at the top of the site plan here, you'll see there is an existing driveway that circulates the building, and that's where they will continue to maintain their access for this application. The concerns with regards to the stone wall are being reviewed through the concurrent application for the residential developments. So at this point, they are not proposing any cut-ins to that stone wall.
Thank you. Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a quick technical question for the planner. But is the backyard now the front yard? Like, where's the front yard? Is it on Clonmel? Is that the front now, which is actually the back of the house?
Through you, Mayor, that is correct.
Okay.
So the technical frontage is the shortest of the lot lines, and that would be the frontage along Clonmel.
That's why all these calculations were not making sense to me.
Councillor Martin.
Building on that comment, you had just specified to Councillor Columbus about no changes to the front of the building. Are there changes to the rear of the building?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I should say there's no changes to the exterior of the building. So it is all completely characterized by the Heritage Act, so no exterior changes can be completed.
Thank you. I wondered if you could provide additional information as to the temporary basis. That seems odd to me, and if you could explain that, please.
Absolutely, thank you. Through the mayor, the purpose for the temporary nature of this application is to help in terms of the overall development plans. So the intent by the proponent is that once the residential components are approved and in place and operating, that the Clon Mill building would act as a bit of a clubhouse or a gathering space for those residentials, and the need to have the 9 rooms for accommodations would be negated, so that temporary use would come off. And then I believe the intent is that at that point to potentially go back to just the 3-room bed and breakfast at that time. But the proponent does have a presentation and would be able to answer that question a little bit more specifically.
Additionally, I'm hoping you can clarify on the special events. That's pretty wide open, and as we've heard from a lot of community members, there's a big concern with that. It doesn't specify what that includes, what it doesn't include, what the hours are surrounding that, the type of events. Can you share that information, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of the special events, it isn't a use that's accessory to the hotel. So we're trying to keep it a little bit broad just in terms of from an enforcement, so as to not get into the specifics of a shower or wedding, because then it can become a little bit more of an enforcement issue. So if we limit it at special events to a certain space, we're hoping that that would be the driver in terms of the overall function of the property.
And what is that space?
Through you, Madam Mayor, through the bylaw, it is identified at, I believe it's 170 square meters.
Okay, and lastly, can you comment or share additional information on the bylaw process and maybe speak to the, how do I want to say it? Speak to the amount of bylaw calls that have been received from the public, and is that, I know we've got overwhelming support here as well as in attendance today, but can this be validated through bylaw?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can speak generally to this. I don't have some of the specifics with respect to calls that may have been filed directly with our enforcement division, but I am aware that there are a number of events that have been happening, and we're hoping through this we can work with our various departments, including bylaw, the health unit, fire, to make sure that a number of the concerns or the codes for the property can be addressed appropriately.
Thank you.
Councillor Huffman.
Hi, I have a couple questions. What has the building been used for over the last 50 years? What have been the specific uses of this building?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't want to say specifics on that. I'm sure Ms. Linney is here and she'd be able to give you a little bit more information. There has been a multitude of uses, including former bed and breakfast. Like I said, there is the boarding and lodging, so I know that component has been on there as well. And the primary function of a single detached dwelling is the primary function of the property.
Okay. My next question is, so I have a good visual of the building, but I'm not very good with all of my directions and topographical maps and things like that. Where exactly will the parking be located?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The property, or excuse me, the parking will be located on the northern portion of the property. So that'll be kind of, if you're facing the Clonmel Estates from Clonmel Lane, it'll be to the right of the priority. So you'll see where the big parking area, that'll be kind of to the right of the property and closer on the Tisdale side of the site.
And so how much of this then is in view of the neighbors?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe that we've tried to mitigate that where possible. There's some existing landscaping kind of in that area. The bulk of the parking is kind of located away from the residential. So the houses stop. If you're looking at that site plan, kind of where the road bends on there, that's kind of where the residential units stop on Clonmel. So a majority of the parking is kind of away from that. And the spaces that are kind of adjacent, the applicant has proposed a privacy fence as well as some landscaping along that to further mitigate any visual components.
Okay. I have just two more things very quickly. Has there been a decision made, if this goes forward, what material will be used for the parking lot?
I am not aware. I believe Mr. Arians would be able to speak a little bit more specifically to that. I believe it's to be gravel at this point, but he'd be able to speak a little bit more on the details of that. We haven't got to that point just yet.
Okay, and then in regards to, I'm just following up with what Councillor Martins had mentioned, that there's been correspondence received in regards to concerns regarding this proposal. I do want to make note of the fact that much of the correspondence is duplicate or triplicate. So it's not that all of a sudden we have 50 people saying they're not in favor. It's a specific amount of people who have maybe corresponded several times.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Shelley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just need some clarification. On page 130 of our package, it indicates that there will be no amplified music after 6 p.m. So just so I understand, does that mean there could be a band outdoors with a set of drums, 3 trumpets, and 2 acoustic guitars?
Through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of, that was a request that had been put forward by the applicant. Through the bylaw, we are not recommending that be included to be carried forward. From a staffing perspective, we feel that the noise bylaw kind of takes precedence with respect to the noise happening in the area. And through that noise bylaw, in residential areas, no amplified music is permitted at any time. But to your question, they could have some acoustic music happening outdoors, and then that would still fall in terms of the enforcement from a noise perspective.
Thank you.
Councilor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Shannon, is Public Works, were they circulated on this application?
Through you, Chair, they were circulated through our development engineering group.
Okay. I'm confused as to whether it's a septic tank that's servicing this site, or is it municipal sewer?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe at this point it is a septic system, and however, as part of the building permits and code requirements, they would have to ensure that there is proper functioning services to adequately address the property, and whether or not that would be through the existing septic system or if they would have to connect to municipal services, that would be determined at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Shannon, due to the historic nature of the building, does it currently meet accessibility standards inside, or is that going to be addressed moving forward?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would be addressed moving forward.
Thank you.
Councilor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is pertaining to, I believe it's 134 in our report, DCS 18-108, it's page 10. That's where we have the applicant and agent proposing temporary zoning provisions. We've gotten an answer that our staff is including the no amplified music after 6 p.m. in their recommendation. We have some other bullet points there as well. And I was just wondering if there's any other bullet points there that staff would be recommending, or if I'm to understand that, and I'll list them since they're here, a hotel on a temporary basis with a maximum accommodation of 9 rooms for a period of 3 years. It sounds like that is something that you're recommending. Site-specific definition of a hotel, I believe that's also in the recommendation. And then we get to this special event space limited to 170 square meters, where an outdoor event space is prohibited. And I did want to get a comment on the minimum required parking of 41 spaces. So these are suggestions coming forward from the applicant and the agent. And my question to staff is, which one of those proposals are included in your recommendation, which are not?
Through you, Madam Mayor, with respect to the proposals or the bullet points on page 134, planning staff are in agreement and have moved the proposals forward, all except for the no amplified music after 6 p.m. I would like to note that the applicant in the original applications, there was a notation for 50 persons, for special events for up to 50 persons. However, through the review and through discussions, we are recommending that be limited to 170 meters because in terms of parking requirements and land use applicability, from a bylaw perspective, we can kind of monitor the square meterage as opposed to 50 persons, which is typically addressed through code regulations.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a couple questions, Ms. Van Dalen. Okay, you state, I just want to be clear on this. So you state that the clause no amplified music after 6 p.m. will not be included.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct.
So how do we differentiate this? This is because of the hotel provisioning between this and the glamping case that we just heard.
The no amplified music is, through that we are more specifically looking at the noise bylaw, and in the noise bylaw it states that no amplified music is permitted in any residential zone at any time. So that's where I was coming from with respect to this application. I can't speak more to the glamping because I don't know what the noise bylaw is.
So it's not after 6, pardon, sorry to interrupt you. It's not that it's not after 6, it's not at all.
That's correct.
Okay, I see. The next question I have, I understand the site plan component from the perspective of there's also the potential for a future development here. And so the site plan component relates to the future development or also to the hotel component exclusively, as in you just suggested that she would have to put in, she's currently on a septic system and she would have to attach services. If the future development did not go forward, would she be equally obligated to attach those to municipal services?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So I'll kind of break the question down. So in terms of the site plan, we are recommending, or planning staff is recommending that the hotel be placed under site plan control, specifically to address a number of the concerns that have been raised and to address the kind of usability of the property. As well, the future residential would also be placed under site plan control and would evaluate the components that are associated with that development. And then in terms of the septic system, if it can be proven that the septic system is of sufficient capacity to service the property and the function of Clonmel Estates, then they would be able to continue as such on the septic system. If it's not sufficient to accommodate the servicing for the property, at that point they would have to look at options for servicing. One of those options could be the connection to municipal services.
Okay. this comes back to my point earlier that it's not up to Norfolk County to overstep the intention of the legislature, and I fully agree that there is a site plan provision that should apply to a new development in that area from the perspective of adding additional units. From the perspective of a change in the usability, I'm not sure that I would agree with that when interior renovations are specifically excluded. My concern is that if this was to go forward, and you have to attach services, municipal services, on the basis that a large-scale development is going to occur there, and then that large-scale development is prohibited, now a person has incurred significant costs that they may not have otherwise had to incur. The other question I have is in regards to the special event permits. So are you suggesting that with a hotel, then, you do not need a special event permit?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I forgive me, I'm not very familiar in terms of the special event process. As Ms. Dusling indicated earlier, that is something that comes through our corporate services. They handle the issuance of those permits, but the hotel does allow special events as an accessory component to that, so they would be allowed to have functions as part of that use.
So if it's part of the use, then in all likelihood, it would not be on a permit basis.
Correct.
So I guess a little bit what I'm driving at with this is zoning is the appropriate way to regulate. But in this case, we also have a provision in the Ontario Planning Act under Section 34.9 that's what's commonly known as the grandfathering clause. And when this has traditionally been used for events, weddings and funerals and so on, would there not be merit to saying, okay, if this was grandfathered in, then the applicant would have to proceed and receive a special event permit versus a hotel permit would be sort of carte blanche to do as you wished on any particular day?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of grandfathering or kind of legal non-conforming uses, with that there is typically a component of legality with that. And in speaking with our building department, there's been no change of use or no permits that have been issued that would recognize the uses above and beyond the certain component. And it does invoke, for a bed and breakfast, you can have up to 3 bedrooms, but through the Ontario Building Code, once you hit 4 or more rooms, it triggers different code requirements in terms of your fire and separations and that sort of thing. So without having some of that background, I would agree with you. In some circumstances, the grandfathering clause may be applicable in some properties. However, in this case, I don't feel that it applies.
Mr. Lowe, perhaps I could direct that question to you then. If it was established that this had traditionally been used for events, for weddings and hotels, and it had continued to be used for those events, would that not fall or potentially fall under that provision?
Sorry, all right, it's working, sorry. To answer in sort of generalities, there's certain criteria that need to be satisfied under Section 34.9 of the Planning Act. You did correctly identify them just now, quite a few of them. So if there was a pre-existing lawful use prior to the date of the zoning bylaw that would purport to prohibit the use, and if that now prohibited use that had a legal non-conforming status prior to that has continued in a continuous manner, then generally speaking, those are the criteria of Section 34.9. And Section 34.9, because it is part of the Planning Act, would then trump our zoning bylaw. In terms of the specific application, I just want to be clear for the public who's hearing this. I don't know enough about this file to know whether or not those criteria are satisfied, but to answer your question in generalities, yes.
Do you know if Linny at any point had asked whether or not this would fall under a grandfathering clause?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I know there's been a number of conversations, but I'm not sure if that avenue has been explored by Ms. Steffler.
Myself personally, I think this would be worth exploring because I believe there is merit to not changing the property to a hotel zoning and allowing special events to not require any type of permitting. I also think there's additional costs and so on that would be incurred with that. But I think that it would be, it would help to inform council if we knew whether or not those uses continued through that year and whether or not they were in place before the zoning bylaws came into effect. Councillor Martin.
You made a comment about no change of use, and I wonder, I'm not sure if I should direct this over here or to you, Shannon, would the duration of events be considered as in any way, shape, or form as changing the use? Because it's one thing to potentially grandfather a property in that had maybe 6 events in a year, 2 weddings and 2 funerals and 2 picnics, compared to grandfathering in a facility that now can have multiple events. Does that, the frequency of events, does that speak at all to the use and changing?
I am not aware of that. I might ask Mr. Loeb to address that in terms of the frequency or the numbers of events that happen, if that constitutes the use in the long run, if I'm summarizing that correctly.
Speaking about grandfathering in a property and allowing it to host events without a permit, because it always has. Well, what if in past years it has hosted a total of 6 events in a year, and now it's looking at hosting 6 events in a month? Does that speak to the change of use in any way, shape, or form?
Those are certainly factors that are considered in whether or not the use has been continuous, is probably the easiest way to put it. It's a common law interpretation of what continuous could be expected to be. It's difficult to answer that without knowing exactly how many events would normally be expected in an area like this. But another way to put it would be if you had a business, let's say it was a funeral home, you wouldn't necessarily have to have a funeral every single day. If you miss a day, that doesn't mean you're not a funeral home anymore, sort of thing. And so, unfortunately, in particular with a special event venue, it's difficult to make that determination without sort of first looking at what the overall context of that business was when it was operating in a special event manner. And so you have correctly identified some of the factors, and yes, that's part of the analysis, but I couldn't begin to do it just live in this moment because I don't know the history of the property.
So to clarify, at this point in time, we don't have enough information to speak to a potential grandfather clause, and we don't have enough information to speak to change of use for that clause. So is that something that we can look at a later date and have information brought back?
So typically the requests regarding or inquiries regarding the application of Section 34.9 are applicant driven. So it is very rarely the case that the municipality will know the complete history of the property to the extent that the actual landowners do. And so in the broader legal context, what we're talking about is the county has a zoning bylaw and it presumptively applies to the properties it's covering. If a landowner wishes to make an argument that it doesn't apply in the specific context of Section 34.9, they need to demonstrate that they satisfy those criteria, and so it's for the applicant to come forward with that information, which I only point out in the context of, generally speaking, unless the applicant comes forward with it, our staff could never know enough about it in that instance. So I can't speak to the history of this file, but it's not for lack of preparation in terms of a planning report or a legal analysis if there has been no request and information provided to review. So I just want to provide that larger context.
Any further questions? Councillor Van Passen.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure who to direct this to, but might be the lawyer too. But is it possible that there's 2 concurrent applications from this applicant? Are we dealing with them in the wrong order? Because if I remember correctly, if the application for the residential units are approved, the one's going right down the middle of that parking lot, so that the parking lot's going to be gone. So how does that meet the criteria of a hotel if the parking lot's not going to be there? Or should we deal with them at the same time? 'Cause I think we're doing them backwards.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Van Passen. In terms of the processing of the applications, and Mr. Arians will probably be able to speak to this a little bit more on the issue, but it's my understanding that the applicant wishes to have the hotel and get that legally established so that she continue to operate